As stated here for quite some time, things are most certainly going to get worse before they get better. We will see that beautiful horizon as it crests over the hill so we can create that more noble and dutiful future in the end, but what you need to realize is it is most certainly going to get worse before it gets better. And that's what we're seeing now, multiple steps towards that path. Because as we see the United States coming forward announcing that we're $35 trillion in debt, hooray! Of course, this $35 trillion taking roughly $1 trillion a year to actually finance the debt. And not only that, if you were to actually sweep in the public sector unions as well as the unfunded liabilities, you would realize that the debt that we actually have is closer to 215 to 220 trillion dollars. And why would that be? Well, you can go ahead and take this to a realization of the military industrial complex and the endless funding that we pump into it, as well as the fact of the money that we actually generate within the United States. It doesn't serve the people of the United States because of the endless money printing that destroys the value of the dollar that you use to orient yourself through the economy. Oh, the economy, that's right. We just had an amazing economic collapse, and by amazing, I mean absolutely and utterly disastrous, one of the likes of which we have not seen since the COVID era and the economic crash when we saw $3.5 trillion get shifted from the lower and middle classes to the upper class. The first time throughout all of human history. And not only do we see that chaos unfurling on our side of the globe, but we also see the fact of U.S. military bases now being bombed in Iraq and U.S. soldiers being injured. Why is it that we still have soldiers in these bases? Why is it that we still have soldiers in the Middle East? Oh, well, what it does is give us a possibility to have a foray into the Middle East if any of our soldiers are injured as tensions continue to rise. And what we see now is, well, as the economy continued to collapse and we saw a disaster the likes of which we have not seen throughout the past 4 years at a minimum, well, as all of these companies' stocks tanked, you know who didn't? Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and I wonder why that could be. Starting off with Newsweek, here we see military contractor stocks have skyrocketed since Israel's war started. Published October 16th, 2023. And what's the big takeaway from this article? Well, in fact, it doesn't matter what war it is because the military industrial complex will gladly exploit any tragedy to make sure that they can make a profit. Here we see, as the war rages on and military spending booms, the U.S. arms industry is a big winner in Ukraine, just like they were a big winner in Iraq and Afghanistan, and every single other conflict you can imagine under the sun that is pushed by that of the neoliberal world empire. Here we see from Defense News, defense stocks explode as military activity escalates. And what is it that could possibly be leading to this activity escalating in that of the field of, I don't know, investment in these military contractors, the defense industrial base you see? Well, here we see from the Associated Press, Hezbollah has confirmed that a top commander was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut. Oh, is that so? So we see more actions being taken upon the world stage that will only jettison the possibility for these companies to make ridiculous amounts of profit. And here we see bombs smuggled into Tehran guest house months ago kills Hamas leader. An explosive device hidden in a heavily guarded complex where Ismail Haniyeh was known to stay in Iran was what killed him, according to a Times investigation. Ismail Haniyeh, being the political leader of Hamas, meaning the person who was going to be their negotiator, has now been killed. And that is something that I think is quite stunning to see, because what this very well could mean is that now that there is no one to come to the table as the mouthpiece to be the negotiating arm for the Palestinian people, let's say, because they most certainly don't want to deal with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, this very well could lead to even further persecution of Palestine, which is, oh my goodness, horrific beyond imagination if they are even going to escalate beyond the factors of what we have already seen. Here we now jump on and we see Israel bracing for attack after assassinations in Beirut and Tehran. An Israeli official told NBC News that the country expected waves of missiles and drones fired over an extended period from Iran and Hezbollah. And why could that be? Well, we just saw those examples of exactly why. And who will be making money off of this? The defense industrial base. Here we see, from the Times of Israel, U.S. firm Raytheon wins $149 million Iron Dome contract. Deal adds a second source for defense systems. Tamir missiles suggest anti-rocket batteries to be expanded. So once again, we see one of these military contractors within the United States making ridiculous amounts of profit off of something such as this. Because of course, we're going to have to resupply the Iron Dome with missiles to make sure we can deter what's being fired upon Israel by Tehran and by Hezbollah. So of course, Raytheon's going to need to make some money and produce some missiles. Here we see now from the Daily Mail, America's Ain al-Assad base in Iraq is hit by missiles as Middle East crisis spirals. That's right, Americans have been struck in Iraq, and if you think I'm being hyperbolic, I can guarantee you I most certainly am not, my friend. Here we see from the New York Times, U.S. troops in Iraq are wounded in rocket attack on an airbase. The attack late Monday resembled previous ones carried out by Iraqi armed groups backed by Iran, which have targeted the base repeatedly over the past 9 months. Ah yes, Iran. The big, looming threat that people akin to that of the neoliberal world empire and those within the upper echelon of the, let's say, elite classification of individuals that are the ones that are supposed to be operating on the standards of diplomacy, but never actually do so and only end up leading us into wider conflicts that cause the death of more and more people, but rake in more profits for the military-industrial complex, and in the end, that's all that matters, which is exactly why you see these conflicts exploited, because it doesn't matter the tragedy that those living within them have to suffer through. All that matters is that the banker class can go ahead and get another dollar-due in their pocket, and that is something that we need to take an understanding of when it comes to the fact that wars, well, in fact, every war is a banker war.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Alrighty, quick historical segue. Here we see the bank war waged by President Andrew Jackson. This is a man who truly understood the fundamental of the issue that was going to be the thing that would capsize the United States like the Titanic. And as we see, the banking industry and the monopoly they have over currency manipulation most certainly highlights the fact that even all the way back to the time of when Andrew Jackson was serving as the 7th president of the United States, this man was on top of it and understanding that the only war worth waging was one against the banks. The bank war was a long and bitter struggle waged by President Andrew Jackson in the 1830s against the Second Bank of the United States, a federal institution that Jackson sought to destroy. Jackson's stubborn skepticism about banks escalated into a highly personal battle between the president of the country and the president of the bank, Nicholas Biddle. The conflict over the bank became an issue in the presidential election of 1832, in which Jackson defeated Henry Clay. Following his re-election, Jackson sought to destroy the bank and engaged in controversial tactics which included firing Treasury secretaries opposed to his grudge against the banks. The bank war created conflicts that resonated for years, and the heated controversy Jackson created came at a very bad time for the country. Economic problems which reverberated through the economy eventually led to a major depression in the Panic of 1837, which had occurred during the term of Jackson's successor, Martin Van Buren. Jackson's campaign against the Second Bank ultimately crippled the institution. The Second Bank was chartered in April 1816 in part to manage debts the federal government had taken on during the War of 1812. The bank filled the void left when the Bank of the United States, created by Alexander Hamilton, did not have its 20-year charter renewed by Congress in 1811. Various scandals and controversies plagued the Second Bank in the first years of its existence, and it was blamed for helping to cause the Panic of 1819, a major economic crisis. By the time Jackson became president in 1829, the problems of the bank had been rectified. The institution was headed by Bank President Biddle, who exercised considerable influence over the financial affairs of the nation. Jackson and Biddle clashed repeatedly, and cartoons of the time depicted them in a boxing match, with Biddle cheered on by the city dwellers while frontiersmen rooted for Jackson.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
When you look at the standards that once was the operational ethos of what the bank represented in civil society roughly 200 years ago, and then you apply that to today, you realize that it very much represents the same ideal and, in fact, impacts society in similar ways. And that's not just because it's the bank, it's because of what the institution represents and how it operates. That is the big thing to pay attention to here, and why I always say when I talk about things akin to the banks or wars, that every war is a banker war, which is something Andrew Jackson knew, which is why he waged a war on the Second Bank itself. And what I would love to highlight here specifically is that they love to address that Andrew Jackson had thrust the United States into an economic turmoil, never actually addressing in totality the reason why he had reacted in the way he did, and it was because the Second Bank was in charge of handling the United States' debt after the War of 1812, and once again we see that an economic turmoil had been thrust upon society because of the actions of the banking class. class, and then Andrew Jackson reacting to this is what is then painted as the villain of his time, which is oh so fascinating, and even more so for me personally, because the person he defeated to become the president of the United States for his second term, well, it was none other than who? Henry Clay, brother to one of my favorite people throughout all of American political history and one of my heroes, Cassius Marcellus Clay. If you are unfamiliar who Cassius Clay is, he is one of the most violent abolitionists that ever lived throughout all of American history, if not the most. And oh my goodness, the way in which this man tackled the factor of slavery was truly something to see, and that the British only could be the ones to understand the nature of what it is that he strived for, with the British destroying the value of half of their empire in the pursuit to destroy slavery as an institution in the Eastern world. That is truly something to behold. And what is also to behold is the fact of the actions of Cassius Clay, as the argument he made against slavery was truly something remarkable, as he would sit there talking to crowds as he gave his speeches, claiming, "For those that believe in the laws of God, I give you this argument against slavery," as he lays his holy Bible atop the table. "For those who believe in the laws of man, I present you this argument against slavery," as he places the United States Constitution atop the table. "And for those who believe in neither, I present you this argument," as he takes both of his pistols and puts them in front of him. And this is truly the standard of what it meant to be someone who stood for the freedom of all individuals, no matter what. Cassius Clay being the son of one of the wealthiest slave owners throughout all of Kentucky, and when his father died, he gave away property and money to those slaves that his father had owned after freeing them immediately post-haste of the announcement of his father's death, inciting violence and hatred amongst the entirety of the abolitionist movement, because they were now the ones who were being targeted, all because of the actions of one Cassius Clay. It is fascinating to see how these things end up evolving and unfurling, but nonetheless, let's go ahead now and get back to the topic of what was actually at hand, which is how it is that we're going to see the possibility of a wider war unfurl, and the fact that the bankers are most certainly going to be the ones who are profiting off it. Biden says the United States will respond to attacks targeting troops in a manner and place of our choosing, hours after rocket attacks have left American personnel in Iraq injured. And there we have President Joe Biden, the leader of the United States, or at least the figurehead to do so, claiming that we will be responding in a manner and place of our choosing, which is a major green flag to all of these different military contractors that are the ones that are sitting here raking in buku bucks because of the fact of all of the different wars that they are creating armaments for. And with this, we realize that, well, conflict is on the horizon, because even throughout the fact of seeing the massive economic downturn that recently just hit the world economy, it appears that, like we've already stated, the one sector of companies that consistently stayed true in making profit and having their investments skyrocket was that of the military-industrial base. And that should highlight everything you need to know about the possibility of what could be coming down the pike. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, tell someone you love them. Peace out.